Agent Carter, a highly trained black Secret Service agent, boarded a commercial flight with a critical mission, to covertly protect the president. Unlike standard agents in uniform, Carter was dressed in plain clothes to avoid drawing attention. Despite the seemingly normal environment of a bustling commercial airplane, he remained hyper-alert, observing passengers, adjusting his posture to conceal his holstered firearm, and preparing mentally for his duty. Being part of the Secret Service meant that every agent had to anticipate potential threats in every environment, no matter how ordinary it seemed. Carter's professionalism was reflected in his calm demeanor and meticulous attention to detail. He subtly monitored the aisle, noting passenger movements while remaining inconspicuous, fully aware that his task required him to be both invisible and ready to act at a moment's notice. His mind constantly processed potential risks, balancing vigilance with the need to avoid alarming civilians. Carter's training had prepared him to respond instantly to threats, but his assignment on this flight required discretion above all. His situational awareness extended to every corner of the cabin. He observed expressions, body language, and interactions between passengers, ensuring he could detect anything unusual. The stakes were high. A misstep or premature action could compromise not only his safety but also the safety of the president. This quiet focus, however, contrasted sharply with the assumptions that would soon confront him. Carter was unaware that his presence, appearance, and race would trigger suspicion from two officers, setting the stage for a confrontation that would put his professionalism, patience, and authority to the test. The very qualities that made him an effective agent, confidence, calmness, and preparedness, would become misunderstood by those who could not see beyond their biases, illustrating a profound clash between competence and prejudice in high-pressure environments. As the plane filled with passengers, Officers Myers and Grant scanned the cabin, their attention eventually landing on Carter, a young black man seated alone. Their initial curiosity quickly shifted to suspicion, influenced by implicit biases and the perception that Carter's calm authority was somehow unusual. Despite his neutral behavior, the officers interpreted his posture, demeanor, and solitary position as threatening. They whispered to each other, eyebrows raised, silently building a narrative in their minds about Carter's legitimacy on the flight. In their eyes, a black man exuding quiet authority seemed out of place, especially with the president soon boarding. Their suspicion solidified into certainty, overshadowing logic or context, demonstrating how preconceived notions can escalate into false assumptions. Without attempting to understand his role, Myers and Grant approached Carter, demanding identification and questioning his presence. Carter responded calmly, informing them that he was a Secret Service agent on official duty, his tone measured and professional. Yet, the officers dismissed his explanation, muttering skepticism and questioning his motives. The tension escalated when Grant noticed Carter's holstered firearm, which triggered alarm and fear. Misinterpreting the standard protective detail weapon as a threat, the officers drew their guns, commanding Carter to get down on the floor. Passengers reacted with a mixture of shock, fear, and confusion, unaware that the suspect was a trained protector, not a criminal. Carter's attempts to clarify the situation were ignored as the officers' biases overrode logic. Their perception of threat was shaped not by evidence but by assumptions rooted in racial prejudice and a lack of awareness of security protocols. This moment highlighted the dangerous consequences of implicit bias, particularly when authority figures act on unverified assumptions in high-stakes situations. Despite Carter's repeated explanations, Officers Myers and Grant forcibly restrained him, handcuffing his wrists and stripping him of personal items, including his Secret Service badge. Each action escalated the confrontation, emphasizing the officers' inability to recognize authority outside of their preconceived notions. Carter, aware of the risks of resisting, complied with the officers' commands, carefully measuring each movement to avoid worsening the situation. Lying on the floor of the airplane, he faced the physical and psychological impact of prejudice, realizing that his race had made him a perceived threat first and a person second. Passengers observed in stunned silence, some whispering while others craned their necks in disbelief, unable or unwilling to intervene. Carter's training allowed him to maintain composure, but the frustration and helplessness grew with every dismissive shove. The officers, convinced they had neutralized a danger, remained hyper-focused on Carter, further delaying his return to duty and leaving the president unprotected. The incident demonstrated how authority and bias can clash, even when professional credentials and rank are undeniable. Carter's adherence to protocol and self-control contrasted sharply with the officers' aggressive, assumption-driven actions. In this environment, expertise and professionalism were insufficient to overcome prejudice. The situation also underscored systemic vulnerabilities. A trained Secret Service agent could be incapacitated not by an enemy but by those whose role was ostensibly to ensure safety. The escalation highlighted both the personal toll on Carter and the broader security risks inherent in such misunderstandings. After restraining Carter, the officers escorted him off the plane, holding his arms tightly as passengers watched with shock and unease. Carter's repeated assertions that he was on duty for the president went ignored, and every step through the terminal became a public spectacle. Bystanders glimpsed the unfolding events, some whispering in confusion, while others simply stared, illustrating how public bias can amplify a private injustice. Carter's absence from his post posed a direct risk to the president's safety, highlighting the real-world consequences of mistaken assumptions. Throughout the walk, the officers' expressions remained rigid, reflecting their unyielding belief in the perceived threat. Even as Carter tried to explain that he was protecting, not threatening, the president, the officers remained deaf to logic. The incident exposed how prejudice can override protocol, leaving trained professionals constrained and security compromised. Each moment emphasized the intersection of racial bias and law enforcement practices, as Carter's race shaped perceptions more than his clear identification or professional conduct. This sequence also illustrated the vulnerability of protective details in public spaces where authority is misread or ignored. The officers, convinced they were preventing a potential crisis, acted with confidence that only reinforced their mistaken assumptions. Carter, despite his professionalism, became a victim of systemic prejudice, demonstrating how authority, duty, and expertise can be undermined by human bias in high-stakes environments. Inside the airport security office, Carter was pushed into a dimly lit room and seated in handcuffs, facing the officers with a sense of helplessness. He attempted to explain that his presence was part of a protective assignment for the president, emphasizing the potential security risk of removing him. Officers Myers and Grant ignored his statements, treating him as a criminal suspect despite his federal credentials. Carter's frustration grew as their interrogation escalated, with each question more aggressive and accusatory than the last. They demanded details about affiliations, motives, and supposed plans, all while dismissing his identity as a legitimate agent. Carter's attempts to convey authority, professionalism, and dedication were met with derision, highlighting the officers' unwillingness to reconsider their assumptions. The situation demonstrated a dangerous dynamic in which prejudice and rigid thinking override protocol, allowing misjudgments to escalate unchecked. Carter's training and restraint contrasted sharply with the officers' hostility, revealing how competence can be misinterpreted as threat when filtered through bias. The prolonged detainment also illustrated the consequences of miscommunication and racial stereotyping in security-sensitive environments. While Carter remained composed, the psychological impact of being treated as a suspect despite clear credentials underscored the human cost of prejudice, as well as the operational risks to the protective mission he was tasked to carry out. The absence of Agent Carter did not go unnoticed. A senior Secret Service agent immediately recognized the anomaly and alerted the president's chief of staff. Concern escalated as they confirmed that Carter had been forcibly removed from the plane by airport police, who misinterpreted his role. Upon reaching the security office, the president himself confronted officers Myers and Grant, learning that they had detained one of his trusted agents under the false assumption that he was a terrorist. The officers' smug confidence faltered as the president's authority and presence revealed the grave error. The incident highlighted how racial bias and assumption-driven policing can undermine even the highest levels of security, compromising both personnel and protective objectives. The president's intervention underscored the importance of chain-of-command oversight and verification, demonstrating that prejudice unchecked can pose real threats to operational safety. Carter's professionalism and composure were vindicated, but the story emphasized the broader consequences of bias. Racial assumptions, misjudgment, and failure to follow proper protocol can endanger both individuals and critical missions. The resolution also reflected the need for accountability and awareness within law enforcement and security operations, highlighting systemic vulnerabilities and the human cost of prejudice, even in high-security contexts.